Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Those of you that weren't here last week, Dr. Erika Machtinger um, is an associate professor of entomology at Penn State, and she specializes in veterinary entomology and integrated pest management with livestock. And today she's going to talk to us about ticks in particular on horses. So um, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Give me a second, everybody, as I share my screen. It's going to look funny for just a minute as I get this all situated. All right. Thumbs up if you can see this. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Ken. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, or if you're tuning in after and watching the recording, thank you for doing that as well. We're going to talk about all things ticks and horses, and I actually wanted to start off by looking at this image, and I want you to notice two things. One is the really fat, engorged tick on the cement that I pulled off one of my horses, and that horse is actually in the background. That's Luna. She's my Trakehner mare. She has the misfortune of being mine since the day she was born. She's spoiled, but she's also my demo horse for much of my educational content. So you'll see her featured throughout this presentation. So, a little bit about me. I'm a certified wildlife biologist, a veterinary entomologist. I study pests and ectoparasites, primarily of non-human vertebrates, but it crosses over to people when we start talking about things like ticks. And I'm lucky in many ways that my profession and passion often overlap. So, it's a little bit of street cred. I've been an equestrian for over 35 years. I've competed internationally in eventing and dressage. But most importantly, I've had horses boarded at several facilities. I've had them at home on small and medium acreages. So I've faced many of the challenges that I'm going to be talking about today. And in these three bottom images, the two on the right, two gray horses, the farthest right is Luna, the mare that I just showed you, and the one in the middle is actually her mother, who I competed. So today we're going to be talking about ticks and tick-borne diseases in horses. I am going to use Pennsylvania as kind of a case study. I'm here at Penn State, so a lot of my information comes from Pennsylvania. And in 2019, we conducted a survey around the state and found that 16% of respondents to our survey said their horses had been diagnosed with anaplasmosis, which is a tick-borne disease, and 28% said Lyme disease. And more recent serology suggests nearly 50% of horses in Pennsylvania have been exposed to anaplasma, which causes anaplasmosis, and nearly 80% have been exposed to the pathogen causing Lyme disease. But there are no equine vaccines available for horses, even though they are at risk. So I'm going to briefly touch on the disease component about these tick-borne diseases, but I'm going to keep it brief because I am not a vet. So I recommend everyone has a really good relationship with their vet that can answer some more specific, some more challenging questions about diagnostics and treatment for at least two of the pathogens that we worry about. They're tick-borne for horses. So we're going to start with Lyme disease. To begin with, this is probably the one everyone's most concerned about for their animals as well as for themselves and their family. This is caused by a bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi. It's only transmitted by the black-legged tick or deer tick. Now, the disease itself is not really well understood in horses. It's not really well understood in people either. And we have pretty poor diagnostic tests for both. And often treatment is based on kind of potential exposure and the clinical signs instead of a hard yes or no answer. And the other note is, like you saw when I showed you that 80%, most horses, a lot of horses are exposed to the pathogen, but not that many develop the disease. And we're not really sure why that is. Now, anaplasma or anaplasmosis is a tick-borne disease that is increasing in prevalence. This is also caused by a parasite. It's a blood parasite that's transmitted by black-legged ticks, so deer ticks. And this one, unlike Lyme disease, has pretty characteristic signs that include high fever and lethargy and some spotting on the gums. And this can be fairly easily identified in the blood and has a more straightforward treatment options once diagnosed. So it's pretty acute. It comes on pretty fast, but treatment tends to be a little bit more of a straight line than it is for Lyme disease in horses. Now, I'm going to go and start the rest of this presentation at the end. So the conclusion. So why am I going to give you the conclusion? A couple of reasons. The first is we all have busy lives. You may have to leave early, and I want you to walk away with the major points. And the second is that I want you to sort of see where we're going to go. So this is my kind of last slide, what I want you to take away from this presentation. And so the first piece is that there are a few major ticks of concern, but you do need to know what they are. The second is that there are several tools to be tick safer, but it's not an all or nothing deal. You just want to use as many as you can. Protection should be thorough, both on and off the horse. And bite prevention requires behavior change, not just the knowledge change. That's the trickiest part, finding the time to do the things that actually make a difference. So we're going to do a crash course in tick identification. Now, some of you, we all kind of have a broad idea of what a tick is. You all have probably seen a tick or been exposed to ticks in some way. We're going to do a quick primer on ticks in the Northeast. So we have roughly 25 species of ticks. Most of these ticks are very host specific. So they're groundhog ticks or rabbit ticks or the bird ticks. There's only a few that make up about 90% of what physicians see submitted routinely, and that we can extrapolate from that and think it's similar for vets. So what are those four species? So starting at the top left, they are the brown dog tick. The American dog tick is the top right. The Lone Star tick, which is the bottom left, and the black-legged or deer tick, which is the bottom right. You've already heard me mention that tick a few times. And in New York and in the rest of the Northeast and in Pennsylvania, we see many of these tick species have overlapping ranges, as you can see in this figure. But I also want to point out that you can clearly see 5 ticks pictured here, right? And this is not a reflection on my ability to count to 4, but there has been an addition of a 5th species of tick recently to the eastern United States called the longhorn tick. This is an invasive species from East Asia and some areas of Oceania that has made it to the United States. It's been here since probably around 2010, but we identified it, we being the broader entomological community, identified it in 2017 from New Jersey. And it has spread since then. And it's also important to note that all of these tick species, excluding the black-legged tick, are actually not associated with pathogens of concern to horses. So these are nuisance pests. The black-legged tick is our critter of interest, and because of that, it is important to understand which tick is biting your horse so you can accurately assess your horse's risk or your risk for tick-borne disease. And just to clarify that a little bit further, when I talk about the other ticks not carrying pathogens causing disease, that is specific for horses. Many of those have pathogens that are of concern for people. All right, so let's talk about how we can identify a tick. And we should start at the beginning about what makes a tick a tick. And the first piece is to remember that ticks are not insects. They are actually arachnids. They're related to spiders. They're kind of big mites. But that means that in general, they have 8 legs. So most of the ticks that you're going to see on your horse or on you are going to have 8 legs. But just to complicate things, larvae, which are the first life stage, the smallest life stage, actually only have 6 legs. But they are rarely seen on dogs or people. They feed quickly, and they're not associated with most or any of the pathogens that we really care about in the Northeast. So they're more of a nuisance pest. The second way to identify a tick is that unlike the 3 body regions that insects have, ticks only have 2. They have these fancy names, the capitulum, the idiosoma. The capitulum is basically those mouth parts that dig into your body, and the idiosoma is a fancy word for the body of the tick. And this is flat when it's not blood-fed and expands greatly when it is. And then ticks also have this really interesting part of them called a scutum or a dorsal shield, which you can see highlighted in the bottom images of these 3 adult ticks. These are all female ticks, and the scutum you can see here can either be not ornate or boring, like the black-legged tick or deer tick, or can be what we call ornate, which is our fancy ones. And the neat part about this is that at least for adult females, this can be helpful in IDing that tick. Ticks also don't have antennae. right? So they like to pretend they do. They get to the end of a grass blade or on a plant and they wave their front legs around because they're taking in the same kind of environmental cues that insects do with their antennae, but they don't have antennae. They just use their legs, their forelegs, for that same purpose. And finally, ticks can't fly. Thank goodness. They don't jump, they don't fly. They can fall, but they don't jump or fly. And I think we'd have a much different world if we had a world with flying ticks. So we're really thankful for that. Now, unfortunately, sometimes this can get a little bit challenging because these characteristics can be more difficult to see in some of the younger life stages, which you can see in the top left figure there. These are nymphs. It's really hard to see them, right? They're tiny. And then the bottom, when the adults start feeding, or even when the immature start feeding and they start expanding, some of those characteristics start to become more difficult to see. And then on top of that, it can be even challenging because you may be looking at a male versus a female tick if they're adults. And this black-legged tick here, you can see in the bottom right, the male on the left, the female on the right looks very different from each other. So those are basic features to identify a tick. You can see them here, the 8 legs, the 2 body regions, in this case, ornate dorsal shield. This is an American dog tick female, no antennae, no wings. So we all have a little bit of a better understanding of what makes a tick a tick. So I'm going to open the chat here for a second because I'm going to give everybody a quiz. And I'm going to ask you all, if you're still here, still with me, is this a tick? And you don't have to answer in the chat. Oh, awesome. Thank you, guys. Yes, this is a tick. All right. This is a tick. This is an adult female black-legged tick. What about this one? Is this a tick? Now, obviously, these are much bigger than you would normally see. No. Does anybody know what this is? For those of you saying no. All right, a few of you do. Yep, bedbug. This is a bedbug. So these guys can get really flat too, and they can move around. But again, here you can see this has antennae. It only has 6 legs. They may be flat, but we don't want to see these guys either, but they're not ticks. What about this little guy? Is this a tick? Anybody know what this is if you think it's not a tick? Yeah, like, thank you, Laura. It is a horror show. Does anybody know what this is? All right, MJ Gibson says CAD. Kate's not sure. All right, MJ, you were right. This is a deer cad. Often confused for ticks. They're found on deer. The real giveaway here is how fast these guys are. They're flat, but they move super fast, and ticks do not have that same level of speed associated with them. So they're creepy, they are bizarre, but they are not ticks. So this is a deer cad. What about this one? Yeah, you guys, this is probably what we all love and fear, right? Are engorged. This is a female black-legged tick, who has just had a blood meal. Now I'm going to play this video. I hope you guys can see it here, even if you can't, you're just seeing the images. Are these ticks? So that's a penny. This is my arm. Yeah, Jennifer, that's right. So these are 2 nymphal black-legged ticks. I'm going to just scoot ahead. So you can see there's two ticks in this image, and then right below the one closest to the penny is actually a freckle on my arm. So that's how small they are. All right, so they are super tiny. Think about that on a horse, right? That's some of the challenges that we're dealing with. So if you have a tick and you guys did great, but if you're not sure what the species is, or if it's even a tick because it's super small, and or you took it off your horse and you ripped half of it apart or whatever, you can send the specimen or a clear photo to an entomologist or a vector educator at your state's land grant extension, preferably somebody who works in vectors with ticks and not like your vegetable entomologist, although they may be able to direct you to the right place. But they can give you an accurate identification. And again, this matters because you may have Lone Star tick, you may have an American dog tick. These are nuisances on horses, but we don't worry about them from a pathogen standpoint like we do with black-legged ticks, as we previously mentioned. So, the next section is about the tools we need to prevent tick bites. And I'm going to be honest, you don't have to spend too much time identifying ticks if you prevent them from biting your horse in the first place, right? So, to do this, we need to understand risk a little bit. And you can understand risk by understanding habitat, but also understanding a little bit about tick life cycles. Okay, so ticks, actually, black-legged ticks in particular, go through a really long life cycle. It actually takes them about 2 years to go through this life cycle. And that starts with the larvae, that really small six-legged version of the tick, hatching out in the late summer. In the fall, they'll take a blood meal, usually from a small mammal like a mouse or a bird. And then after that, they're going to overwinter. And in the following spring, they're going to molt into a nymph that spring. The nymphs will take another blood meal from, again, probably a small mammal, something maybe a little bit bigger. They may accidentally get on us, people, or dogs, potentially accidentally on horses in that spring summer mix. And then they're going to drop off and they're going to molt again. And then we see the adults from that cohort of ticks in the later fall and in the early spring. And the adults of black-legged ticks and of dog ticks and of Lone Star ticks, they really like feeding on larger animals because the tick's bigger, so they need a bigger host, right? So they're going to feed on things like deer, like bears, and horses, right? So horses really fit into that large animal section. So while the risk of tick-borne pathogens is often in the midsummer for people because nymphal black-legged tick activity is higher, and that's when people start going outside a lot. And you can see this if you look at the bottom figure in particular, which is our black-legged tick seasonality of the different life stages. I have highlighted in the kind of light reddish color, that middle of the spring into summer. That's the high risk time for people. And we're looking at that light blue line. Those are when the nymphs are coming out and their populations are the highest. So that's like May until the end of July, basically. So we're outside doing a lot of activity. The nymphs are outside. They're tiny, they're hard to see, so people are more at risk. But for horses, the risk of tick bites is not just the summer, but also includes that late fall and that early spring when those adult ticks are active. And you can see again in that bottom figure, those lighter green lines. That's when the adults are active. And I've put in kind of a highlighted blue when that activity or when that risk is higher for horses. So that means even when your horses look like muddy Ewoks, as we're seeing right now as everything's melting, that's when you may need to start thinking about tick management. So that's the first behavioral part. It's hard for us to remember when we're not being pressured with flies, and so we're not thinking about it, but you have to start thinking about it a little bit earlier than you'd think. The second greatest risk factor is where ticks are found. So most ticks of concern that are going to get on horses are going to be found in tall grasses and brush and in the woods. And you can see some of the images here of some risky habitats that include pastures that border the forest, tall grasses and paddocks, and pastures that are actually in the forest. But it also includes other risky areas, like when you're riding on the trails in the woods. So that picture I showed of my mare with the tick and that tick that was on the ground, that came after I had gone on a trail ride a few days beforehand, and in other similar areas where you may be taking your horse. So let's transition to talking about some tools for habitat management or tick management, and perhaps the least invasive way is to manage the habitat, but maybe not the most sensitive for everyone's time, right? It takes a lot of time to do this. But you can do some basic things to help with tick management by modifying the habitat. So you can remove the down debris like fallen trees. You can cut back overhanging branches. What that does is it reduces the shade, so it allows the sunlight to hit the grass and help dry it out. Ticks really need humid areas, so it dries it out, and the ticks don't like that. Or you can move the forested habitats away from the fence lines. I recognize the latter is a little bit more difficult to do if your property is already established. Remember what I said in the beginning, use as many tools as you can. Rerouting fence lines may not be something that is in your list of to-dos, and I totally understand that. It can be just as helpful just to understand the risk is there and put together some other management or other control options. So some of the other management methods that can be used in the environment include chemical control methods, so synthetic and plant-based compounds. The benefits of these synthetic compounds is that they're highly effective, and surprisingly, very few sprays are required because of that tick life cycle. So you're targeting different life stages. In fact, only two in the spring, about a month apart, and one mid-fall have been shown to be enough. And actually, current research is actually suggesting that fall application may be enough. Now, this is for residential areas. This is not explored on equine facilities. But if you have some high-risk areas, that fall application may be enough to knock down ticks the following year. And also what that does is it keeps it away from some of our native pollinators that we worry about, or some folks worry about in the spring with a caricide application. So it may be a way to help mitigate some of that risk. I do have to mention these are toxic to non-targets, not compatible with aquatic habitat. So if you're next to a stream or a pond, you do need to be careful about applying these around those areas. And when we talk about large farms, this can be costly and time intensive to do all of the perimeter. So it may be more beneficial for targeting some risky areas. And there are many, and I mean there are many options for plant-based acaricides. And the vast majority of these have not been tested to determine if they are effective. Many of these seem like a better idea and they are, quote, more natural. But unfortunately, like I said, there's very little evidence that most or any of these actually reduce tick populations. And some are actually still toxic to native pollinators. So you got to remember, arsenic is natural. That doesn't mean it's safe, right? So they may require more frequent applications. They may be more expensive. And so it's not always the positive trade-off that folks think it may be. This is a great figure from Western Connecticut State University. They put this together to demonstrate the duration of pyrethroid base, so those synthetic products, and how long they last, which is about 8 weeks. So if you look at the top blue bar, it's the pyrethroids, and they're going to last about 8 weeks. So you're going to apply one in the early spring and one about a month or 2 months after to get the ticks basically for the season that we worry about. Whereas if you go down and you're using essential oils or pyrethrins, which is the plant-based version of pyrethroids, or garlic, which basically doesn't work at all, you see the length of duration that those may have some effect is significantly lower. So a biological control method I get asked a lot about is the use of chickens and guinea fowl for tick control around horses. And we got asked this as tick biologists so many times that a group in Virginia decided to actually test this to see if guinea fowl were effective at removing ticks. And what they found was that the chickens and guinea fowl will eat the adult ticks. They won't eat the immatures necessarily, but they'll only eat them if they encounter them. And that they also served as a host, so fed nearly as many ticks themselves as they ate. So they were helping to generate the next generation of ticks, even though they were eating some. So with the cost of keeping fowl more than some of the other methods, and the fact that their feed, when you feed them, may actually draw in tick hosts like mice to the area, I never recommend getting chickens or guinea fowl for the purpose of tick management. If you have them for other reasons or want them for other reasons, great. But they may serve as hosts to feed ticks as well. Another method of targeted control of tick hosts, so this is for mice, which are hosts for immature ticks, are these little cardboard tubes. They're called tick tubes, and they're filled with permethrin-treated cotton. And then what happens is mice, they like to nest, so they'll come and collect this cotton that's treated with permethrin, bring it back to their nest. They treat themselves, they treat their offspring for ticks. This reduces the non-target effects of kind of broad spraying of chemicals. The effectiveness of these tubes is limited in large-scale applications because we may not be reaching all of the host. Ticks feed on a lot of different animals, so chipmunks and birds and foxes and all sorts of different things. And this is only targeting the mice. But it is one of the few methods that a homeowner can use themselves. So it may help reduce the tick population or potentially reduce the pathogen, because mice are one of the major hosts of Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the pathogen causing Lyme disease. So tick tubes get deployed in mouse habitat, so in forested, brushy areas every 10 yards or so. And you want to apply them monthly. That's the newest research that's out there. Is the label says put them out at least twice, and we found that it's better if you put them out monthly through October. Okay, so now we've talked about a few off-horse tick bite reduction tools. We're going to transfer now or transition to horse tick bite prevention. Uh, for the best protection, you should be implementing both. But I recognize, especially if you don't own your farm, in your boarding, that can be really difficult. So we're going to focus now on the on-horse portion. And again, like I mentioned with the other tools, I want to highlight the so-called Swiss cheese model. I'm going to talk about different options, and some may be more suitable than others for you and your horse or your particular situation. So the goal is to use as many as you can, as many as you can remember, to create this overlapping barrier to help reduce that tick bite risk. No method that I'm going to talk about is a silver bullet. So for on horse, there are several different options. We've got spot treatments, spray repellents, systemic spray, and protective clothing. We're going to go through these individually. So for spot applications like EquiSpot or similar products, they work by distributing pyrethroids throughout the horse's body. So because these are a little bit, I don't say more regulated, but they're a little bit different from your sprays, it's really important to follow the label as directed. I do want to note that there are no published studies that I could find in the United States on how well these work against ticks, but ticks are on the label for some of the spot treatments. So TBD, I would say anecdotally, I have seen decent success with these, especially if you are putting them out according to the label rate. But again, there's no silver bullet, so this is one option. For topical repellents, what we refer to as fly sprays, some will also work for ticks, but I recommend very specific application. All right. And this is to make sure, again, ticks are really small. Right. So I guess if you think about when you put fly spray on your horse, and most of you have probably used some sort of spray on your horse, you're spraying the body, you're spraying the legs, and a lot of that comes out as a mist. And most of that mist, especially if you're doing legs, is not actually getting on your horse, right? It's being aerosolized into the environment. And so you're kind of wasting product. But the other thing that happens when you spray a mist is that those droplets hang on to the very end of the hair. That makes it really easy to rub off or to dry and evaporate out, or if the horse rubs to go on something else. So we want to make sure that we're applying repellent in the way it's going to be the most effective. And at first, horses should be relatively clean and dry. That I know is easier said than done. But we can all aim for perfection and get as close as we can, right? The second is that you want to use a towel or a brush or some sort of microfiber mitt. My vet in Florida, I gave her this, please don't put on repellents this way. Please use like a rag. And she said self-tanning mitts were the best thing that she found. So you spray the product onto the mitt and then you wipe it over your horse. This does two things. The first is that it makes sure that it's getting down into the hair shaft, so it's going to last longer. And the second is that you are physically making sure you are covering all areas of the horse's body, so you're getting that full coverage. You also want to make sure you're applying this once a day. So you want to choose your product wisely. And this is why I say that. So we did a study a few years back looking at permethrin, which is a pyrethroid, and how well it repelled ticks. The first horizontal line that you see here is red horizontal line. That's at the 50% effective mark. So 50% effective at ticks not biting that horse, falling off that horse. Okay. And then the vertical mark that's dotted is 2 days. So how long after we applied it to the horse did it work? Okay. The bottom line of this is our water control. So that was only water, no permethrin. And we got very little repellency as expected. The green line above that is about 2.5% permethrin. Okay. And we only got about 40% repellent action out of that. And that crashed after 2 days, one day, really. And then we start to see some effectiveness. So once we get to 5% permethrin, we started to see things being somewhat effective over that, over 70% roughly effective. And then at 10%, we had much closer to about 90-95% effective. But both of those, 5 and 10% permethrin, dropped to 50% effective by 2 days. So that's why I say add repellent daily. But also, here's the real issue. This is an example of a fly spray bottle that gives you the active ingredients found in that product. This is Ultra Shield Red. I have added up the pyrethroids that are in this product, and it adds up to 1.275%. Okay, so remember the lowest one I tested over here, that green line, is 2.5%. And this is half of that. Okay, so there are no products for horses that use anything over around 2% pyrethroids. And there's a reason for that. This is why. Horses are really sensitive to the additives that manufacturers use in pyrethroid products. So, under no circumstances do we recommend using concentrated permethrin unless it's diluted according to the label instructions, which is about 2 to 2.5%. But recognize that you are not likely going to get complete tick bite prevention using the current pyrethroid products. They just don't have enough oomph in them to keep all the ticks off the horses. Okay. But there is some, I'd say, decent news in this, and that other products may be effective. And they're actually what some folks would consider more natural. So previous studies we've done in our lab have shown that some of these products, some of these more natural products, including EcoVet and Outsmart, are actually more effective than typical fly sprays against flies. And we have shown with some caveats that this is in the lab, that EcoVet in particular had 100% tick repellency when we tested it in the lab. Other products on the market that now include these fatty acids, those are the active ingredients, include Ultra Shield Gold. So I'd recommend giving those a try. They're really good for flies, and we think that they're more effective for ticks as well. I do want to have a quick note that homemade repellents are not evaluated for safety and effectiveness. They are unregulated, they're untested, and they can be dangerous and irritating to the skin, for people, to horses. They also can volatilize. That means they dissipate into the air really quickly. So those formulations that I previously showed, that the pyrethroids barely lasted a day, and many of these are going to last far less. So for those reasons, I strongly discourage the use of these compounds and mixes. All right, another method of on-animal control is the use of fipronil, which can be purchased as a spray for dogs. This is another systemic method. It does not have equine data validating its ability to kill ticks on horses. However, as I mentioned, it has been validated and tested and labeled for dogs. It is not currently labeled for horses, so you must consult a veterinarian for off-label use, and they can give you an appropriate dosage after that. And finally, there's some evidence that treating horses with protective clothing, as we would say, fly boots and fly masks and fly sheets, instead of fly sprays, may be effective. And it may be effective to treat these with permethrin. This is not the pyrethroids that I'm talking about that are for the fly sprays, but permethrin that is made for fabric, so treating clothing with. You can buy protective clothing already treated with permethrin, or you can send away your fly sheets and fly boots and fly masks to a company called Insect Shield, which will actually treat them for you. Now, up until recently, we had no data on whether this worked for tick protection or not, but I can give you a little bit more insight onto as to whether or not we're seeing any protection coming from these kinds of applications. So a few years ago, the Penn State equine team asked some volunteers to either have their horses wear treated fly boots. So again, that's permethrin treated fly boots and fly masks, or untreated fly boots and fly masks, or not wear anything at all. We asked them to check their horses multiple times a week for 4 ticky weeks in the spring. So weeks we thought we would have quite a few ticks around. And what we found was that by keeping the boots and the masks on the horse, we could reduce ticks on these horses by somewhere 50 to 60%. So again, not a silver bullet, but by just having these physical protections, it helped reduce tick bites. Now, something to keep in mind again is that when ticks are active, we talked about this in the late fall and early spring. This is far either after flies are active or way before they're active in the spring. You need to start thinking about putting boots and masks on your horses. And you may feel ridiculous at your barn, like there's not a fly to be seen, and you've got fly boots and fly masks on your horses. So, that is a tricky one to remember. And you also have to think about doing this before your horses have even shed out and it's mud season, and all of that can be challenging. So things to keep in mind as we move forward, but it is a potential option. So the last prevention method that I'm going to chat about is actually not a bite prevention at all, but a pathogen transmission prevention method, and that's doing a tick check. Again, same thing that we do for people. We want to do tick checks on your animals year round, and doing them frequently is really needed to make sure you intercept those ticks that may have gotten through your other bite prevention methods. So, first thing you want to do with a horse is make sure they're comfortable and secure so you can reach all areas of the animal. You're going to be touching some sensitive areas. You're going to be reaching into places that, they may try and follow you if you're trying to do a check on the tail. So you want to make sure they're wherever they're going to feel comfortable and safe. Again, because we may be dealing with animals in the fall or spring, you may consider trimming some of the shagginess off of them. It's easier to kind of find those tick bite zones, especially if you have a really woolly horse. Luna's Tricaner, she doesn't really grow a whole lot of fur, but if you have an animal that's full on Ewok, you may want to trim down a little bit. It makes it a little easier. It's also easier to check horses when they aren't covered in mud because dried mud can feel an awful lot like a horse, or sorry, like a tick on your horse. But again, we're all experiencing the great melt of 2026, and my horse is completely covered in mud right now. So again, a little challenging to do, but we have great intentions, right? Try to do these tick checks when your horses are clean. So where do you check? Based on 2 years of our study that we worked with Pennsylvania owners. You can see here the heat map of where they were finding ticks. So lots of places, but really the big areas are going to be under the jaw and on the chest. And actually, I showed you an image earlier of the tick that was on the ground that was found right in the chest area. They can be found anywhere, but tend to be in places that are really protected. From the elements. They tend to have like more exposed skin, so the groin, under the tail, the crest, the elbows, that sort of thing. In fact, I recently got sent these photos of a tick bite in a really peculiar area. I'd never seen this before. It's around the pastern of this horse, so ticks can like really be anywhere. So you want to make sure you're doing thorough checks. All right. So to start a tick check, you want to make sure you know your horse really well. You understand their sensitive areas. My mare here, Luna, is totally fine with me checking her right ear, which you can see at the top. But her left ear is like a no touchy zone. So stifles can be another sensitive area. Anything in the groin area. So you just want to make sure your horse is used to being touched in all of these spaces. So to do the tick check, you want to use a light constant pressure on your fingertips, kind of like you're reading Braille, and go against and with the hair, and focus on the areas that are most at risk. Check everywhere, but focus on those at-risk areas. And you're going to spend about 3 to 5 minutes per side, depending on the mud level and the hair level. But it's easy to do as you're brushing or currying your horse too. You don't have to spend extra time doing it. And then when you find a tick, you want to remove it really carefully. You don't want to crush the tick because you don't want any of those pathogens that are in the tick coming out, right? So if you squeeze yourself after lunch or something, I always say, like, if I gave you a big hug after lunch, you're going to feel like everything inside is going to want to come out. And you certainly don't want that happening to a tick. So what you want to do is grab it as close as you can to where the tick is biting through the skin. So for people, we often recommend sharp forceps or tweezers to really get close to the skin. For animals, that's much trickier because of their fur. So I do recommend using tweezers or forceps if you can. But if you have a tick removal tool or something that's a bit easier, it's doing a very similar thing. So you're getting really close to the skin and you're just pulling up. So you don't want to squeeze the tick, you just want to pull it out. I'm going to try and play this video. I'm going to narrate as we go. If you can't see it or if it's laggy, I apologize, but I'm hoping some of you may be able to see it. So again, this is a tick on Luna, my mare. This is actually one that I put on her, a tick-free or pathogen-free tick from Colony, but I wanted to demonstrate removal. So you can see I've got a pair of tweezers and I'm getting really close to the base of the skin and I'm just pulling straight out. That's it. You don't want to twist. You don't want to squeeze that tick. You're just pulling straight out and then I'm putting it in a vial. It is just that simple. Same thing for people and for dogs. And then after you remove the tick, you can freeze it, you can flush it, you can crush it, you can get it tested. There are several places that'll test ticks for pathogens. Some will do it for free, depending on your state. And you can get it sent off if you want. And then after you remove a tick, you can apply triple antibiotic ointment and monitor the site. Now, it's not uncommon for horses to develop a localized response to a tick bite. It ends up looking like kind of a crusty bump, and it stays around for a good long while. It's that horse's immune system kind of attacking the salivary components that were in that tick. But if you have any concerns, you do want to communicate with your vet. And the last thing is, a tick removal kit is a great thing to keep in your grooming kit. I'm going to peddle Penn State's. We developed one just for horses to make it simple for horse owners to keep. I have one in my grooming box, so it's always there. So if I find a tick, I know exactly where to go to get tweezers or forceps. It's got a card to help me identify the tick. It's got baggies so I can send it off to get tested. But you can easily make your own if you don't want to buy one that's pre-made. It's really simple to put this together and just have it in your first aid kit, have it in your grooming kit so you're ready when tick season does come around. And finally, that last slide again. So this one's a bit short, but probably the most important, and that's that bite prevention requires a behavior change. Not just you guys came here and you learned something new. I hope you leave this webinar learning a little bit more, but I hope even more that you add at least one new method to your routine to help prevent tick bites on your animals. And perhaps not shockingly, researchers have found that in some surveys, up to half of respondents don't take routine steps to prevent tick bites. This is for people, not for horses, but they don't take the routine steps needed to prevent tick bites, even though they know they're at risk. So I'm hoping I can rely on all of you to take just one step closer to bite prevention. Because at the end of the day, it's my version of Smokey the Tick. Smokey the Tick says, only you can prevent tick bites on your horses. Now, the one thing I'm going to do before I leave this presentation, before I bring it to a close, is to promote our new resource called the Vector Library. So those of you who are interested in ticks, potentially in mosquitoes, West Nile virus, or Eastern equine encephalitis, for people, for dogs, for horses, for any other animals, this is a free online database of all the vector and vector-borne disease educational materials and trainings from all the extension services throughout the country, and includes material specifically, as I said, for people, for dogs, for horses, other animals. And it can be found at vector-education.org. I'm going to hopefully some of you can see this. Again, if not, I'm going to narrate. But if you go to vector-education.org, you can click on Take Me to the Vector Library. It will pop up as a table, so it's just a searchable table. You can go to focus area. We have several different drop-down boxes. Focus area horses. Click on the vector group ticks, and it'll bring up all the information, all the educational information that's out there on ticks and horses. You can search by state or by region. You can search by other vectors. So again, just if you're interested in learning more, this is a great place to go to find that free information. And so with that, I've provided some links here for all of you that you hopefully may find helpful. If you have your cell phone ready, you can take a picture of this slide, take a screenshot. I've left a QR code here at the bottom as well, and I think we'll have the same link put into the chat. That will be great if you take a minute and fill out an evaluation. I'd love that. Let me know if there's something you'd like to know more about, if I didn't talk about something. Things you want to see researched, all of that is helpful for us so we know what's important to you folks, the folks with horses, right? And I also recognize nothing I discussed was super in depth. So I encourage anyone that's interested to reach out to me. I have my contact information in that top left. If you have more specific questions about you, your farm, your horses, your situation, I'm happy to chat with you about ticks or flies or any other pests of horses and your situation. So that is my last slide. I hope, I think we have some. Do we have any questions? I think we had one question. Somebody had a question about vaccines. So we'll answer that one first. Oh, thank you, Hannah, for putting that stuff on. So way back at the beginning, I mentioned vaccines. They do have a vaccine for dogs. Your veterinarian can prescribe that for horses. It is, again, not as easy as yeah, sure, it'll work for horses. It is something you need to discuss with your vet, and they will make that recommendation based on your risk.
I think Kate had a question.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Erica. This is so wonderful. I was just sort of wondering, you talked about, if I got this correctly, the black leg tick is the only one that's a threat to the horses.
In the Northeast, yes.
Okay, so are they just immune to these other diseases that the other tick? Okay, that's an
Yeah, so yeah, it's wild. Like I don't know why poor horses, dogs, and people are we suffer. We suffer from the ticks. Most of these pathogens circulate in the environment and the animals, the wildlife, even cattle for the most part, they really don't respond to it. We're kind of what we call accidental hosts. So we're not part of the natural cycle. And so when we get bitten by something that has an infection, humans in particular respond to a lot of these different pathogens. Horses, we've only really seen anaplasma and Borrelia responses. So like Rocky Mountain spotted fever and the rickettsias, they don't seem to respond to. So maybe they're too big or maybe they just don't have it doesn't affect them. So yeah, so we're not seeing that in horses.
Thank you so much.
I was wondering, so you don't find the Asian Longhorn ticks on the horses at all, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have had so a couple years ago when we did kind of a citizen science project in Pennsylvania, we did yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Yeah. So Lindsay's mentioning that a couple studies in the canine use of the vaccine on horses and the antibody response is typically minimal and short-lived. And some practices use it. It's one of those talk to your vet because the vets and agreed. Thank you, Lindsay. Um, so the Asian Longhorn tick, we've had two submissions from the same horse. It was a new county record for Pennsylvania, but we haven't necessarily seen it in horses yet. It hasn't really been a concern. I think a lot of it has to do with horse people, we're seeing our horses a lot more than the cattle folks are. So we're pulling ticks off more frequently than they are. But we also don't tend to have the same um, broad herd pasture situations. We have pastures, but horses tend to be in a little bit smaller. They're rotated, they're in there. So it's a little bit different of a management situation. That doesn't mean we won't see it. I just don't think we're going to see it on horses to the same level that we end up seeing it in cattle, which is covered, because we often check our horses more frequently.
Yeah, we're doing this 2-year study on ticks and cattle pastures,
Hmm.
and we're finding they love open pasture.
Yeah.
The Asian Longhorn, I'm sorry, but
Yeah,
the
no,
rest,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
They love it and they love it by water, like waterways where it's really
Mhm.
humid.
Is there any other questions? Well, that was excellent. I mean, I
Thank you.
learned an immense amount on. I don't really keep up with ticks, so that was nice. So, I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody else does too.
Awesome.
So,
And yeah, and I encourage anybody, please. I always tell horse people. I tell everybody, but horse people in particular, because I like talking to my folks. Please do reach out if anything comes up. It doesn't have to be about this. Anything buggy related and horses, please reach out. I'm happy to talk to you.
Well, thank you. And please, everybody, if you could fill out the feedback survey would really help us as well. So,
Thanks, everyone.
all right, thanks.